Good afternoon. Welcome to today's episode of Freedom Deals Live, where we're going to be pulling apart one of my existing deals. So this is actually one that is already going. This deal has moved ahead. We are DA approved. We are operational works approved. We've actually started work on the house already. So this is a live deal, but I'm going to take you through this one from a due diligence perspective because there were some really interesting things that came up in the due diligence process for this. So for those that are new to this session today, what we do in these sessions is we go through deals live, and I do the due diligence live on the deal. Sometimes it's deals that I'm considering purchasing. Sometimes it's deals that I'm in the process of purchasing. Sometimes it's deals that I've already crashed. And in this case here, it's a deal that I actually have live, and this is a real development. So we are talking a real live situation. Because one of the things when you're starting to do developments is figuring out which are the diamonds and which are the duds. And that's something that does take time. It takes repetition. It's something I would never suggest going into your first deal. If you're talking of development, I would never suggest going into your first deal without having an experienced eye look over the deal before you go unconditional in it, because that can be devastating. You know, your first development should be the springboard that leaps you forward in your financial journey as well as your development journey. But if you buy a dud, that can set you back years. So what we try to achieve in these sessions is give you the ability to start seeing these opportunities ahead of time and start seeing the tripwires ahead of time and figuring out which sides are appropriate to move forward with, which ones are not, where to ask more questions. You know, this is a never-ending learning journey. And in this particular one here, again, I came up against something that I'd never come up against before. Now, I've been developing now actively this exact kind of development now for over a decade. And I'm not sure how many projects I've done now. I'd have to count a lot. And yet, often, there is still something new in every single deal. With this one here, it was quite a surprise, really quite a surprise. And I guess in some regards, we were fortunate that it didn't derail the project. And we're going to go through that today as to how that came up. In theory, it could have. It could have. And that's one of the reasons why it is so important to buy well. You would have heard the saying, you make the money when you buy, not when you sell. And I guess you could also say you buy your insurance or you buy your risk buffer when you buy, not when you sell. If you've bought well, you have the capacity to absorb hits. If you've bought on the red line, you have zero capacity. And as one of my mentors always told me, is development always takes longer and costs more. So if you go into that, and I think one of Robert Kiyosaki's was always expect to be disappointed. There was something along those lines. And that's not meant to be a negative, but if you think of it in the context of if you always go into things expecting that there will be things that come up, then you're not going to be disappointed or surprised when those things do happen. You will be prepared. You'll be able to take it in your stride. Whereas if you've gone into a deal already on the red line, or you've bought, not in a great way, then every little thing that comes up is something that is just going to have your blood pressure go up and your stress levels skyrocket, as opposed to, look, I knew that sort of thing was going to happen and we've got the margin to absorb it. So that's a bit of, I guess, an overarching way to think about development, and always factoring those things in, that things will come up. They always will. You'll also have the ones where, yes, things do swing way in your favor, but you need to expect that there will be the ones that things swing in the other direction as well. So buy well, have the margin to take those things into your stride. Okay, let's have a look at this one first. So now there's a lot of learnings in this one. There's a lot of really cool and interesting stuff in this. And I think, I don't think any of you will be disappointed coming out of the other side. Some of you will be familiar with this deal already. I believe I did show some things about it in a mastermind a few months back, maybe even last year. But we're going to go through it in greater detail today, and let's get into it. All right, so we're talking an 888 square meter block. It has got an existing dwelling on it. And in this particular zoning, which is in Brisbane City Council, your typical lot size is 400 square meters. That's what you can bank on achieving. 10 meter frontages, 400 square meters. Now, I don't really need to put it on the screen here, but you can see this is 888 square meters. You can see that the house takes up a fair chunk. Do you think it's possible that we can achieve a 1:2 subdivision here? Now, obviously, you already know I have, but the question is, can you see how that can be done? Because if we put some dimensions on here for a second. Well, that's 9.5, but I reckon we could get 10 there. But that's only a 318 square meter block. So I think we need to demolish the house. Do we need to demolish the house? What do you reckon, guys? And I haven't done the audio check. And yes, I realize that screen has just dropped out. But so let's take this as an audio check and a visual check. I'll bring that screen back up for you again. So do you think it's possible to do a 1 into 2 subdivision on this site without demolishing the house? Or do we need to demolish the house? What's your take? And give me the reasons why. Either no, the house needs to be demolished and your reasons why, or yes, I think we can do a 1 and 2 subdivision and keep the house, and here's why and here's how. So what are your thoughts, guys? Pop it into the questions, and that also lets me know that you can hear me and you can see me. Roland, depends on what the house is made of, what the northern aspect of the house is, the deck. Northern aspect of it. Oh, you're talking about this this thing over here? Is that what you're referring to? That's actually an old garage which they kind of converted into a granny flat. So it's a separate, not a separate dwelling, but a separate building there. So, but how are we achieving the 400? Or are you suggesting cutting off a section of the house here? Isn't it wider at the back and do a battle axe? Not big enough for a battle axe, Evelyn. Good idea, but not big enough. So in this area here, you need a minimum 400 square meter block at the front and a minimum 600 square meter block at the back net of the rear access driveway. So do the math on that. It means you need over 1,000 square meters to do. Roland, no, the house, if it's a deck on the north, could chop it off, could make a non-linear subdivision too. So I'm still not actually sure where you're seeing a deck here. Well, anyway, I'll answer the question is that the house doesn't have a deck. So if you're looking at the different structures, so yeah, there's no deck on this house here. There is this section over here, which is a separate garage / granny flat, but there's a few meters in between the buildings here. And then you've got the pool over here. So, but you did hit the nail on the head there as a non-linear subdivision. Yes, that is the answer here. So what we did here was we had a pre-lodgement meeting with council on this one, which is often a good suggestion. So why do we have a pre-lodgement meeting? There was a few different things we wanted to talk to them about on this one. But the very first thing was exactly that. How are we going to achieve this subdivision and what is council going to support? Because my preference here would be, even though yes, it's a minimum 400 square meter blocks, my preference here would have just been a rational rectangular 300 odd square meter block with a 10 meter frontage. And yes, we could get 10 meters here. We did need to get it surveyed to confirm that, to make sure that we had enough distance here that we weren't going to have fire rating issues with this house here. And we're down to the centimeter, but we could do it. So when we had the site under contract and we were looking to go ahead, we had that site surveyed and to ensure that we had the separation that we needed. So what we did was we went to council for a 1 into 2 subdivision with a 10 meter frontage and just a rational rectangular block here. And basically what they said to us was, look, in a nutshell, it's an impact accessible development. What that means for those that haven't had to deal with that is impact accessible means that it doesn't meet the code. It's close, but it doesn't meet the code. So what happens then is there's a process where a sign goes at the front, it gets put in the local newspapers, notices go to all the neighbors, and people have their opportunity to have their say. They can put in objections and they can also put in notices of support. And ultimately, if there's enough pushback, then it will be rejected on that basis. I will say that it is a bit of a political thing. If council's wanting things to go through, they seem to be much more happy to ignore a few pushbacks. Whereas if they don't want it to go through, all of a sudden those pushbacks seem to take on a whole lot more weight. So you just need to be mindful of the timing as to when you put these applications in as well. Apologies for that screen continuing to drop out. So, you know, there is a political aspect to all of this stuff in that not a wise thing to put applications in that are questionable or playing with any sort of a line close to any sort of elections, particularly council elections. So that's something that's a strategic conversation to have with your town planner, but those are things that you do need to consider. So what happened here was we went with that and they went, look, it's impact assessable. So you could go down that path. We did a lot of pushing around in this meeting to try and get a sense of where council was at with it. Apologies for this issue with this screen. What I might do, just give me a minute. I'm just going to drop that as an additional screen. Okay. All right, not the best display on the screen, guys. Apologies, but just dealing with the tech as we go. So just give me a comment that you can see that now, and you can see my aerial shot and it's all showing up fine. So what they came back and said was, look, it's impact accessible. They weren't exactly saying that they were pro it. And then we pointed out to them that, yes, we could actually do that scenario where we actually just made a boundary that, thanks, Roland. If we made a boundary that came along here and then just fanned out wider at the back, then basically you end up with a block like that. Now, we didn't think that was the best outcome, but that would have been code accessible because, not that it's showing it here, but we were able to achieve the 10 metre frontage and we were able to achieve the 400 square metre block of land. So this was a code accessible development. So they kind of went, oh, yeah, it's a fair point. All right, well, your choice. But we kind of got encouraged to go down the code accessible path. So we took the hint, but we did actually expect during the process that they would push us back or encourage us to go down this path, but it didn't happen. They took us through. So we ended up with a subdivision like that. So look, I don't necessarily think that's the best thing for the outcome. Best thing for the neighborhood. They even said themselves, look, the plan doesn't always provide the best outcome, but that's what they were happy to go ahead with, and that's how we could get the subdivision through. So that's roughly what our plan ended up looking like. Now, a few other things that came up in this process, which was interesting. Now, let's have a look at some of the services. All right, so we've got, oops. So we've got our NBN. NBN's no issues. We'll come back to this one, stormwater. And we've got our water and sewer. Okay, guys that have been doing this for a while, what do you see with the water and the sewer? So this is our property here. Water here, sewer here. What do you see? Is this workable? Is it not workable? What challenges might we have? What are your thoughts? For those that are new joining today, one of the things we always talk about is water, sewer and stormwater are often the things that can derail these smaller developments because they're not pressurized. Water is pressurized, you can push it uphill. Sewer and stormwater, typically not pressurized. So you need to be able to have a way to access water and sewer, which is downhill, so gravity is going to feed into it. So Roland reckons sewer win and water win. So let's start with the easy one being water, 100%. It's right there in the footpath. There's, don't need to do any road crossings. There's actually a manhole there. Well, actually not a manhole, but what have they labeled it as there? Oh, they've just labeled it as infrastructure. It's not very helpful. And then sewer we've got in the back. Now, the only thing I would say that could improve the sewer situation would be that it'd be further towards the fence. So it's great that it is on our block. The block is relatively flat, so we've got no issues with fall, but it is a fair few meters off the fence. So in terms of usability of the land, the likelihood is you can't build a pool over that sewer. Pardon me. You may not even be able to build a dwelling over. You probably can. But as soon as you have the sewer coming out further into the block, it just creates complications. But as a good example, you see this one here. Well, that didn't stop them building over that, but it would have made the build more expensive because they had to build over the sewer. So while it may not stop building, what you do need to consider is that if the sewer is in a location where it's got to be built over, it is going to add cost to the build, which ultimately is going to reduce the value of your block of land. Because what you need to think of is at the end of the day, regardless of what is happening underneath the ground, the house is only going to be worth so much at the other end. So anything to do with your land that increases the cost of doing the build ultimately is going to come off the price of your land, because that's the value of your land. The value of the end product is not going to change. And it's kind of like the examples of when you renovate. If you go and redo all the electricals, no one's paying you more for that. It's expected that the electrical works. If you go and redo the plumbing, no one's paying you more for that. They expect the plumbing works. And it's sort of the same situation with the land is if you go and sell your land, you go, oh, well, it's the same as that one there. Well, if that one there doesn't have build over sewer and yours does, yours is worth less. Because at the end of the day, both houses will be worth the same when they're finished, but yours costs more to do it because your land was less efficient. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, so in this one here, everything's great, but that sewer, I would love if it was further back towards the fence. So what we did here was we actually had that physically located by the surveyors to find out how deep it was so that we could include that in our application as well. Because the thing that concerned me here was that what if that's not accurate, which can definitely happen? What if it's further in this way? So I wanted to know exactly where that was, and I wanted to know exactly how deep that was. So I knew then, A, we weren't going to stuff up our designs for the subdivision. B, what sort of an impact is it going to have on the block of the land if we sell it or if we hold it and build on it? So yeah, in general, a win there, but just that was like okay, let's just have a closer look at this. In the end, the location was pretty accurate, and I forget the exact depth, but it's not going to be an issue. But that is something you need to be aware of. Now, this got a bit more interesting. So what we're looking at here is stormwater. Right, why do you think I say that's interesting? This is our property here, stormwater. What do you see? Oops. Why is this an interesting stormwater situation? There are pros and cons to it. And remember, in these sessions, to get the most out of it, do not be worried about getting the answer right or wrong. Be willing to throw the stuff out there. Be willing to throw the questions and answers out there, even if you think you might sound silly. Because I promise you, if you don't get over that, it's going to be very hard for you to learn this. And even now, I still take the approach with my consultants of basically taking the approach of being the ignorant one, because you tend to learn a lot more if you take that. You can always switch it up and hold your ground in times when you need to. But if you are willing to admit your ignorance, people will be more willing to share more information with you and educate you more, and you end up learning more. Roland goes, under the existing house would need an easement from the new property. Yeah, so that's the interesting part is if you look at that location, so that's in off that boundary behind there, just to give us a bit of a location, it's sort of in the middle of this property over here. So if I just zoom out, it basically comes straight through here and underneath the existing house, straight out the back here. But you can connect it, depends on the slope. Yeah, so yeah, look, that one's definitely an engineering question. I actually expected that we would connect into it. And I actually forget all the details of this one. This is months ago, but in the end, the advice was not to connect into it. It was just going to be cheaper to go curve and channel and just as effective. But that would have been an option if we had slope issues or something like that. But yeah, so the interesting thing about this is there is that stormwater pipe going underneath the existing house. And as part of the DA, they have actually enforced an easement over it, even though that easement, because technically in an easement like that, you're not allowed to put any permanent structures. But that easement is going where the existing house already is. And, why do they bother doing that? Well, I suppose the idea is eventually in the future, if this house ends up getting demolished, whoever builds there in the future would then need to leave that section available. So they're sort of just looking into the future to protect their ability to access that infrastructure in the future. But so yes, there is actually an easement going down the side here and under effectively that existing house and through the back here. So we cannot build over those sections. Now, I mentioned a secret map. What I will say now, which we don't typically go through on these sessions, but and the reason being is I very rarely deal with sites that even come close to this stuff. But what we're talking about next is flood and overland flow. So flood and overland flow is something you definitely need to be aware of, and I will try and include a bit more of it in these sessions in the future. So depending what council area you're in, it's dealt with in different ways, but you've got different types of flooding. You've got coastal flooding, you've got creek flooding, you've got river flooding, you've got overland flow flooding. I've maybe forgotten some there, but basically you've got all these different types of flooding. Typically each council will have different maps for each, and they'll have different categories. And it may be a case of if it's category 5, you just can't do squat on it. If it's category 1 with a bit of fill, you can do a few things with it. But then again, the different types of flooding are dealt with differently, because some happen slowly and stay for a long time. Some happen quickly and move away quickly. And then you've got things like if you've got a river flooding where the water is gushing past versus areas where water is just going to fill up. There's all sorts of different things that come with flooding. But this one here was clear on all of those maps. There was no overland flow. There was no creek flooding. There was no river flooding. There was nothing. Absolutely clean skin. So no reason to consider anything. And then council comes out with, oh no, we want an easement for our overland flow. So that's our site there. And on their internal map, this shading here is overland flow. But that is not on the publicly available maps. So that one is brand new to me. It was brand new to our town planner. Neither of us had ever seen this before. The council has this overland flow map internally, doesn't appear to be publicly available anywhere, but it is impacting their planning decisions, which to me seems flat out wrong. But anyway, you learn to play with the rules of the game. So what this ended up doing was they demanded a 1 meter easement down this boundary here as well. And because we do need to do a bit of fill on the block, we're having to do a retaining wall 1 meter in and then keeping that 1 meter free down the side there for the overland flow. The magical overland flow that doesn't exist anywhere other than on their internal secret maps. So again, good reason to do pre-lodgement meetings and have experts that are in the know. So yeah, very interesting one. And again, this is why I stress the thing is that things do come up. You need to make sure that you've got the appropriate margins, because let's just say for argument's sake that this was much more heavily impacted by that overland flow that was not visible to any of us. Maybe the site wasn't subdividable, or maybe we needed to do a lot more fill and retaining to deal with that overland flow that there was no way for us to know about. But again, if we've bought well, while we're not happy about it, we have the ability to take the hit. At the price that I paid for this house, I could have put it straight back up on the market and resold it at a profit. Not the profit that I wanted, but I could have just got out and resold it. Or if I wanted to, I could tart up the house and make a better profit. But either way, I had bought myself the security and the safety in buying well. Had I paid over the odds, or potentially even what you would argue market, like I believe I paid 20% of the market for this. Had I even paid market, then I probably could have still done a tart up on the house and got out clear, but I would have been fighting an uphill battle. Okay, so now, fortunately, in this case here, we got the subdivision through. We were able to find solutions to all the concerns, and we got DA approval. We've got a 1-2 subdivision. We've actually just started ripping out all the stuff inside the house, putting in the new kitchen, putting in the new bathroom. We're tarting up that house and flicking that one on. And I will share that in a later mastermind when we do a deep dive into the deal, but we're building something cool on the new block over here as well. But let's assume that I wasn't doing that, and let's do a feasibility. But before we do the feasibility, guys, any questions on what we've gone through so far? So it could be questions on the water, the sewer, the stormwater, the easements, the fanning out of the boundary. Something else I'll just throw to you here is, let's say, now don't hold back on the questions because I'd rather us not have that dead space. So if you've got questions, write them in and I'll come back to them while I talk to you about this next part. So let's say, for argument's sake, that we didn't have 10 meter width here and still be able to have the appropriate setback from this house here. Well, you can also do this sort of a fanning situation at the front. Because we had so much frontage here, if we truly did have an issue with achieving a 10 meter frontage, we could have done that same thing. It could have been to here and then just gently fanning out, which visually from the street, you would never have seen. I have done that in the past and you just can't tell. Technically, you could even still take it all the way to here and then just do a 45-degree angle or something like that here to get the 10 meter frontage. So it's a bit of a funny exercise where you just need to tick that box. So whichever way you do it is workable. In this case here, we actually did have just the perfect amount. I think we ended up with it's like 20 centimeters over a 10 meter wide block, something like that. But every bit was good to have because we lose that meter down the other side for that easement. Okay, we've got no other questions that have come through on the servicing. So what I'll do is move on to the feasibility. Oh, just reload that. Okay. All right, now sorry for the visuals. I understand it's all a bit different today. Okay, so now this is gonna be a bit more challenging because I'm hiding your comments here. So just bear with me while I try and shrink this down so I can still see your comments. Okay. So subdivision, guys, what sort of time frame should I be working with? Lead-in period is how long until we get on site, until we actually start work. Construction period is pretty obvious. Titling and settling, that's actually including plan sealing as well. So basically from the point where we've stopped doing the physical work to actually getting the physical title or the paper title where we're legally allowed to transact on that property. Tell me these breakdowns. Remembering this is a 1 into 2 subdivision, we did need to create the additional lot. It's not a splitter where it was already on 2 lots. So tell me what you think for lead-in period, construction period, and titling and settling periods. Don't all rush in at once, guys. I will say too that whether we went code accessible or impact accessible definitely makes a difference to the lead-in period. Not only in, I guess, there is an additional time allocation you need to allow for, because if you do an impact accessible development, now this may be different in different states, but there's always a notification period, which is typically about 4 weeks. So that's 4 weeks where everything just sits still and the public has their ability to have their say. So if you would normally allow 8 months for a lead-in period for code accessible, then you need to be at least 9 months for impact accessible, but I would say longer, because there may be the time afterwards to deal with whatever comes back through that impact accessible. So yeah, I would say at least an additional 2 to 3 months for impact accessible, at least, depending on how much you're pushing the boundaries. So, all right, we've got Roland leading the pack here with his suggestions. All right, so we've got 9 months for lead-in, construction, 5 months, titling, 4 months. Yeah, so look, I'm going to say that's about right. 9, I'll go with exactly what you've said there for the moment, Roland. 5 and 4 gives us our standard 18 months for a 1 to 2, which, yep, should be fairly good in this sort of situation. We'll leave our buffer as the 20% on construction for the time being. Now, I purchased this for $1,050. Sorry, $1,050,000, I should say. Now, I actually had an agent call me after I'd purchased it because she'd been trying to list this one for ages. And she was calling to kind of convey her surprise as to the price I'd paid, because she reckoned that I could put it back on the market straight away and sell it for 1.2, 1.25. And that's the kind of phone call you want to get. And the reason that was, I guess, achievable was the people that were selling it didn't want to go to market. They were very private. They didn't want people going through their home. They did just want a quiet off-market sale where they didn't have to touch the house, didn't have to do anything to the house. And look, ultimately, I just put the number forward that is going to work for me. And then it's up to the side to decide if that's going to work for them. They were very happy with the outcome. I was flexible with my terms to facilitate their move and all that sort of stuff. So we got a win-win situation. Okay, so sewer in this situation here, we're just plugging into the back section. So you'll see we've got the allocations there, 5K for an additional one. So we will make that a standard one there. Water, we've also got 5 for an additional one. And yep, it's straight in the street, so that's good. Stormwater, really not much to report there. Power and telecoms, now actually we didn't look at that. Let's have a look there. Now I think you can see that there is the overhead power connections here. Yep, right there. So overhead power is what we're going to be doing here. So what do we put in our allocations there? 2K for communication and power, 2.5 if an additional power pole. So I'm going to allow 5 to allow for a power pole as well. We're not demolishing a house, but we are demolishing that additional garage and the pool. So I would estimate 25 grand for that. Now, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. We have actually had the work. It's actually starting this week, but I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but I know that's plenty for it. Erosion sediment control, rear access driveway, we do not have. Earthworks, I'm going to leave that 10 in there because there is a bit to be done. Sorry guys, my screens are playing fun games here. I just want to make sure you've still got access. Yep, good. Okay, so there is a bit of earthworks to be done because a bit of fill will be required. So I'll leave that 10 grand in there. No footpath, no seepage pits. Yeah, there'll be a bit of turf. Retaining, yeah, look, I would say about 15 grand is probably about right there because we do need that retaining wall down the side. Fencing, actually, I think those numbers are actually what I calculated for this site way back when, although there's no tree clearing, so we'll delete that. Now, for this one here, I'm going to say 120,000 for the reno. Now, why am I saying 120,000? We're just doing a first run feasibility here, but these days, if you're doing a tart up on a house, trying to do it for under 100 grand is very, very challenging. Yeah, Roland, there were trees, but when we've got the demolition crew out there demolishing the granny flat and the pool, none of those were substantial trees. Getting them to take those with them when they do that other stuff, I'm factoring into that existing demolition number. So, but yeah, good question. Okay, so I think we've covered off everything we need to there. Now, everything here is going to remain relatively very much the same. Let's have a look. All of these are just standard fees. We're not changing anything drastically here, although actually we won't need a electrical engineer. Let's just make sure we haven't included that. Don't think we'll need that. Civil consultant, yep. Accounting, bookkeeping, traffic. No, we won't need a traffic report. Okay. All right, so we've got 2.8%, so that's including GST for our commissions. And we actually don't need a lender's break fee on this one because, spoiler alert, we're actually not selling the, actually we will be selling the house, but I think we'll get past the period where we do a lender's break fee. But look, let's add it in there anyway. Okay, now I've been told that the existing house as it is now would probably sell for about 1.1 to 1.2. So we'll put that in at 1.150. And I will admit I'm taking a bit of a stab here on what this block would sell for now because I haven't repriced recently. But based on the pricing that I got probably 6 months ago, which is before we've had further elevation, I think to say that we would get 750 for it would be very comfortable. Let's have a look at financing. So we've allowed 6.5% interest rate for the finance on an 80% lend of the purchase. Let's work on the assumption that I either have the cash or I've got a joint venture partner, so I'm not applying an interest rate to it. Let's see, where are we sitting? All right, 19.37% at 288,000 profit. And that's including a $40,000 buffer for our construction. Oh, actually, hang on a second. I just realized I've undersold myself there because we've allowed for a reno budget, but then I've put in the price based on what it would be worth unrenovated. And I've been told renovated that we should be pretty good heading over the 1.3 mark at least. So that would have us sitting at 28% and 421,000 in renovation. Sorry, in profit. So that's for a quick tart up on the house, not doing anything major there, and renovating, demolishing on the other side and selling off that block of land. Now, like I said, that's not exactly what we are doing with this property, but we are going to be building something on the other block, which I'll share with you in the future. And we're going to most likely be retaining that one. But the house we will most likely flick on. But look, we looked at lots of different options for this one. We actually looked at converting that house into rooming as one thing as well. Because there's a lot happening in that inner ring or middle ring area at the moment. There are certain parts of that market that have been really undersupplied in terms of the type of housing. So there's definitely some interesting opportunities in that space at the moment. But okay, questions, guys? We've done pretty well. We're at 36 minutes. We're getting better at this. Questions, and if you've had any specific key learnings, what were they? Pardon me, I'll pop that back up again. Otherwise, that just makes the screen very unpleasant to look at. Now, something I will say, which we haven't done to, I guess, a perfect level in this feasibility is, actually, I'll ask the question, GST. How do you think GST applies to this development when we are, based on the feasibility we've done here? So number one, we're renovating and selling a house, and we're creating a block of land and we're selling the block of land. So Evelyn, checking overlays are up to date. Yeah, look, I guess in principle, it's a good idea, but truth is how? At the end of the day, there was no way for anyone to know about that overland flow path other than a pre-lodgement meeting with council. That's a really key takeaway there is, you could have searched as much as you liked. You could have asked your consultants, and what are you going to do? Go to the council every single time you look at a property and say, hey, are your overlays up to date? Because they're probably just going to say yes. So what I would say the takeaway there is, one, pre-lodgement meeting is very powerful. Two, buying well, making sure you buy well. Gary, house no as it's existing, as in no GST. Question, how are you solving the overland flow again? Okay, yep. So first of all, do the GST part. So yes, when you do a development, now this is an accounting question, and this is important to talk to your accountant about, because as with many things with the ATO, often their instructions are not very clear. It's up to interpretation, but there's been a lot of case law around this. So with renovations, basically, if it is a cosmetic tart-up, it is not considered to be a brand new product. So therefore, there is no GST payable when you sell it. However, there is a line that you can cross. Once you turn that renovation into a substantial renovation, where that house is then considered to be a new product, then it can attract GST, when it can have a GST obligation when you sell it. So that's something to be mindful of. Land is considered a new product. So there is always GST payable. Typically, there is GST payable when you sell the land. But that's something to be really careful of with the house side of things, is if the renovation becomes substantial, which the determination of that is a grey area, but then you can be at a place where GST could potentially apply. So then it's a case of when this feasibility is done, you actually need to then look and go, okay, what of this can I claim the GST credits for? What can't I? Because basically the subdivision is going to be proportioned to, okay, land GST can be claimed, and the GST is creditable. This side where there's the house can't claim the GST credits, but also not going to have to pay the GST at the other end. So you've got to be mindful of that. And how are you solving the overland flow? So in the end, that's been done with the earthworks in the way the property is falling and maintaining a 1 meter clear easement down that boundary side there. So effectively, it's creating that space for the overland flow to go down through that easement. Okay. Well, that about wraps us up for today, guys. So love to see in the comments what your key learnings out of this were or your key aha moments, and also an opportunity for any final questions. Also, if there's anything in particular that, if possible, you would like me to cover in these sessions in the future. You're welcome, Gary. Thanks. So I can't promise that I'm going to cover everything, but if there are specific things that you'd love to see covered in these sessions, then by all means, pop it in the comments. And if possible, I'll look to cater to that in the future. Keeping obviously within the context that these are due diligence sessions. So we're not talking about structuring. We're not talking about other topics. You know, those sorts of things we cover in my monthly masterclasses. So by all means, put in requests for the monthly masterclasses, but these sessions are specific to due diligence. Pre-lodgement meeting will cater for them. As in the pre-lodgement meeting will identify those things. Yes, typically it will. The caveat on that being is that there's nothing actually holding council to anything they say in a pre-lodgement. I have had council completely backflip on what they've said in a pre-lodgement. So, and that's what I alluded to earlier about the political atmosphere. We were getting close to a council election, and when we did the pre-lodgement, we were far away from the election. By the time we got the application in and it was getting processed, all of a sudden the council election was looming. And what I would presume happened is word came from up above telling everyone basically just hold fast on any applications that were even potentially questionable or the line or anything like that. So you just need to be mindful of that yes, pre-lodgement meetings are powerful, but they are not binding. Okay. Thanks very much, guys. Great session, good questions, and good interaction. So I will see you all next week. And until then, feel free to send through any queries, any questions, and I'll see you on that next session. If you've got questions and queries in the meantime, best place to pop them is on the Facebook page or on the Instagram, on my Instagram account, on any of our posts on there. And where possible, I'll answer them. All right. Thanks. Talk soon. You're welcome.